When you're bottle feeding a calf, what you want to do is straddle the calf's neck, hold the bottle up real high, and hold the calf's neck up. That way you keep the neck down, the neck down low, the head up high, and all the milk goes down into the stomach instead of going into the lungs. So there I was, 40-degree weather, standing up to my ankles in mud, straddling a calf that really didn't want me there, and taking instruction from my neighbor Debbie, who's hovering over me, telling me the right way and the wrong way. And this is when I knew that my life had changed for good. In 2006, I lived in Chicago. I had lived there for 3 years. Thomas and I lived there, and we got married in September. We decided, 2 weeks after the wedding, to pick up and move to the farm. So this is where I was in October. My neighborhood in Chicago, one of the most densely populated cities in the U.S. You can walk to everything. My whole life was in about a 3-mile radius of where I lived. My neighborhood in Kentucky. This is the same scale. I lived in a town called Fountain Run, population 400. This was home in Chicago. Climate control, indoor pool, shuttle that would take me around the city if I really wanted it, and my home in Kentucky. We had a wood stove for heat. This was a 100-year-old farmhouse, pretty drafty, so that wood stove would last most of the night, and then in the morning we'd get up and knock the ice out of the kitchen sink. And we had a composting toilet. If you've never used one, it's an experience, and I lived with that for a couple of years. These were my neighbors in Chicago. My building is right down there. These were my neighbors in Kentucky. This is how I got around Chicago. Didn't have a car. Most of the time we walked or used public transportation. I walked a mile to work. Every now and then, like on our wedding night, we'd spring for a cab. In Kentucky, we had a car. It was necessary when the grocery store is 40 minutes away. But we only took it to town about once a week. And when we were on the farm, this is how we got around. Our friends and family thought we were insane. But we had some really great reasons for moving. First, it was an adventure. We just wanted to do something totally different, totally outside of what we knew. And this was a way to do it. I grew up in the suburbs. I had never had a garden. I didn't know how to take care of animals. So this was an opportunity to get out there and learn how to do those things. It was also a chance to gain some perspective. We had lived in Chicago 3 years, and in that time our income had quadrupled and our savings hadn't budged. When we weren't out spending money on clothes and food and things we didn't need, we were at home watching TV. And one day we looked across to the building across the street, and you could see the TVs flickering in unison. There were about 100 different people watching the same thing we were. We didn't know any of them. We lived in a building of over 200 people. We didn't know anybody's name in our building. So, 2 weeks after our wedding, we sold everything. We packed up what little was left into the smallest U-Haul van, and off we went. We lived on the farm for 2 years, and I have far too many stories for a single speech, so I'd like to just share a few lessons that I learned while I was at the farm. The first lesson is patience. How many people have grown a vegetable garden? Yeah? Okay, so you know, when you're starting tomatoes from seed, it takes forever to go from the seed to the seedling to the plant to finally some fruit, and then it's ripe so many months later. But one bite of the first ripe, warm tomato off the vine is better than anything that you could get at a grocery store. The next lesson. Stuff happens. When you have over 100 head of cattle, stuff happens a lot. Sometimes You're walking along, and stuff happens like a banana peel, and you land in the field. But it's not how often or how severely this stuff is happening to you and whether it ends up in your hair or, it's how you deal with it. So you wipe your boot off in the grass, and you keep moving. The next lesson is control. We spent so much time telling the cows to go this way, telling the cows to go this way or this way. And then when you've got a bull calf that's staring you down, and a bull calf is about 800 pounds of unpredictability, you realize that you don't have that much control after all. And sometimes it's okay to release that sense of control and just walk away. The final lesson I'd like to share today is simplicity. I went from a life that was just a bombardment of media and sensory overload to a place where our next closest neighbor was over a mile away. We heard birds, and we heard pretty much nothing else for 2 years, unless we wanted to. But I found that sitting on the porch, enjoying the silence, breathing more slowly, just taking it in, watching fireflies and having good conversation is so much more powerful and so much more satisfying than a night out with friends at restaurants and fancy places or a shopping trip. They just can't compare, and I think that's a universal truth. My husband, Thomas, who some of you have met, knows me very well. And when I first had this crazy idea of, hey, let's move to the farm, he said, why don't you step back, write yourself a letter, figure out exactly what you want to get out of this experience, what you expect, what might go wrong, and make sure you give that a lot of thought before we actually pick up and leave Chicago. So I did. This is the last line from my letter to myself. There will be bugs. There will be days that are too hot, days that are too cold, and work that is too hard. But I will be a better person for having experienced it. Mr. Toastmaster.
Good seat now.